So which camera is better for beginners, the iPhone 15 Pro Max or the Sony FX30? Now this isn't as simple as it seems, but one definitely is better in some situations than the other, and we do have to break that down, and it's probably not the thing that you might actually think. What's going on, my friends? I hope you're all doing absolutely fantastic. If you are new to my channel, please consider subscribing. So the first thing we must talk about is who exactly are they for? When you actually discuss an iPhone, you think, okay, well, it's not professional. You wouldn't be really using this in a professional sense, but they actually use the iPhone to completely film the Apple event, which is incredible. But obviously they had a whole bunch of lighting, they had the same amount of crews. Essentially they just replaced a regular cinema camera with the iPhone and had all the same tools around there. So it really just comes down to obviously having a good team, but it still can be used in really high-end productions, which we've seen many times before. And also when it comes to professional work, this can be broken down into so many different categories like UGC creators, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube Shorts, any kind of content creator that's out there that is making money with their device would technically be classified as a professional because they are within a profession that makes them money. And some creators can make tens of thousands, if not six figures in their field, which is incredible to say in 2023. But the game has completely changed over these last few years, and having something this powerful in your pocket could be an absolute game changer. And look, I know the DJI Pocket 3 just dropped as well. I had the 1 and 2 and I know how great they are, but we can't talk about that in this video, but it will be another video coming on. Now we've got to talk versatility. I actually went interstate and I took my FX30 and my iPhone 15 just to see which one I would actually utilize the most and which one actually gave me the biggest amount of versatility in different situations. Now, when you do actually have ND filters and a whole bunch of cases and stuff and SSDs, this is where the FX30 is just the camera and the lens itself. Sure, it is a little bit bulky when it comes to, trying to build these things out, but if you do just have an ND filter already on the front and then you've got your lens and your camera, it's not too big of a difference, but obviously the image quality is very similar, but obviously you are stuck with one lens unless you have a zoom lens on the FX30. This is where the iPhone gives you 3 different options when it comes to lens choices. When it comes to straight out of the box, the iPhone 15 gives you so much more. You've got a wide angle camera, you've got a 24mm camera, and then you've got a telephoto lens as well, which is pretty incredible because you've got 3 different focal lengths that you can change between. Whereas if you do buy the FX30, you obviously have to get either a zoom lens or you got your prime lens, but that's also a pro and a con at the same time because you want to be able to have the options to change lenses and get creative with certain focal lengths. And this is where it becomes a little bit difficult with the iPhone because you only have 3 lenses, and sure, you can put filters on top and try and replicate very similar looks that you can get with say the Helios. I've got the Helios 44-2 on. You can see really nice swirly bokeh, anamorphic lenses I can put on there, oval shaped bokeh, really nice creamy backgrounds. Depends, you can change that with the style of lens that you're actually going for, and it's really hard to replicate with the iPhone. And you're pretty much just putting a little bit of glass on top of your lens, whereas when it comes to the FX30 you can choose a whole bunch of different lenses and put it directly on top of the sensor, which is going to give you a completely different look. And obviously this allows you to be a little bit more creative when it comes to the FX30 because you have more options than you do with the iPhone. So let's dive a little bit more into image quality because this is where things get a little bit complex and we have to break it down into the 3 different focal lengths obviously on the iPhone and then try and match it with the FX30 as well. Now we start with the wide angle lens, and I did stop the aperture down so it would be at its sharpest when it comes to using the FX30, and they were much of a muchness here, especially when you zoom in. You go to that 24mm lens on the iPhone against the FX30, and same again, very similar. The FX30 does seem just a touch better, and when it comes to that 120mm lens, the FX30 does seem just a little bit better, but let's test this on an actual person. So you can see Amber sitting here. We have the FX30 on the left and the iPhone on the right, and you can actually see that depth of field difference, but the image looks very similar when it comes to this 24mm focal length between the 2 cameras. Then we go over to the 120mm, and you can clearly see the FX30 is very, very crisp, a lot of detail and very clean in comparison to the iPhone. The iPhone quality is very average when it comes to the 120mm focal length, but I'm extremely impressed when it comes to image quality of the iPhone. Now in that image comparison, you could see it is very similar, but obviously the depth of field is the biggest difference between these two, because the iPhone has a very small sensor, the FX30 has a Super 35 sensor. But if you actually filmed on the iPhone 15 without telling anyone, they probably wouldn't notice any difference. But that's when, if you put it side by side with like the FX30, you're going to notice that depth of field differences, and the look is completely different because it has a shallower depth of field. You are more separated from the background, which kind of looks better majority of the time. It really depends on the situation, but it just seems like the FX30, you can have more flexibility and more control over that depth of field, more control with the focal lengths that you want to go for. It does seem just obviously that little bit better with the FX30. And I think one of the key differences right now is that I can literally see myself on the flip screen on the FX30, whereas the iPhone, I don't even know what's going on because I can't see the actual screen. You're going to have something else to monitor the iPhone screen. So if you are filming talking head pieces like this, that is a major difference. And for me and my workflow, I prefer to have that flip screen so I can see myself, so I can see if I'm literally in focus. And one of the key differences, especially if you are a beginner, comes down to storage. And the iPhone has internal storage that you record directly into, whereas the FX30, you do have to buy SD cards or Type A cards on top of that. But the great thing is that you can buy a whole bunch of SD cards or Type A cards and swap them out. Whereas the iPhone, you're going to have to airdrop it or, take it off that USB-C directly into a hard drive. And that brings me to my next point, is that you can record directly onto an SSD. And if you do want to record Apple Log, this is where things get a little bit difficult because Apple Log is extremely big. The files are huge and you're going to need a lot of storage space. Whereas the FX30, the files really aren't that big in comparison to the iPhone. So this is a very difficult situation because if you do want the best quality and film in Apple Log, you're going to have to get an external SSD, that is for certain. But this is where obviously I recommend the Blackmagic camera app and use the H.265 codec, which is a very compressed codec. It essentially keeps very similar quality at an extremely low bit rate. And for almost any kind of usage, I do recommend this as opposed to ProRes 422. And that brings me to my next point, is ergonomics. The FX30 obviously is a larger camera than the iPhone. But the only thing that makes the iPhone a little bit thicker is that you're going to need a case, you're going to need an SSD. And if you're going to have to record audio, that's the difficult part because you have to choose between the SSD or plugging in the audio on the iPhone. Whereas the FX30, you can put a shotgun microphone on top, you can wear a lav mic, and obviously you can record through the SD or Type A cards on the side. But then when it comes to traveling, obviously the Pro of the iPhone, it literally fits in your pocket. And when I was in Adelaide in a different state, I literally just took the iPhone and took the SSD around, and when I wanted to record, I just plugged the SSD in and just got a whole bunch of B-roll stuff. So when it comes to B-roll and recording directly into that SSD, it's great. But I still love the versatility of having a whole bunch of lenses with the FX30. And that is the thing, is if you want different focal lengths with the FX30, you're going to have to bring a whole bunch of lenses with you and change them out. And that means if you want to pack smaller and lighter, obviously the iPhone's going to be a better choice than an FX30 or interchangeable lens camera. Now, I know recently there's been a whole bunch of YouTubers saying that the iPhone is the best camera, and like a definitive answer, I know Maddie Hapoya just released a video saying the iPhone is the best camera that you can get as a beginner, and I just have to disagree. I don't think that is true because you cannot understand someone's situation and everyone's circumstances are completely different. You don't know what they're actually going to be utilizing these cameras for. And for me to recommend the iPhone as the beginner camera, I have to understand their situation. And that's what I make these videos for, so you can make the informed decision of which camera is actually going to be better in your situation. Now, one of the biggest reasons why I think the FX30 is actually slightly better when it comes to the iPhone, and that happens to come down to upgradability or progression through your career. So you're going to be starting with an interchangeable lens camera, and potentially you might get good enough where you're upgrading into a different cinema camera, a different interchangeable lens camera. Who knows where it's going to take you? Obviously, these cameras bring you into the Sony ecosystem. So you're going to be collecting a whole bunch of different lenses for different use cases. And then you can buy a second body. And with the iPhone, I guess if you wanted a second body, you would have to buy a second iPhone, but you're still limited to 3 different lenses. you can only go to a maximum of 120 millimeters. And like we saw, the 120 millimeter lens isn't exactly the sharpest or the most detailed. So having a really big zoom lens, if you want to do sports and wildlife photography and videography, this camera is going to absolutely crush the iPhone. But when it comes to just normal shooting, everyday shooting, that's probably where the iPhone would actually win. But just having that ability to be able to change the lenses, SD cards, different codecs, audio inputs, HDMI, inbuilt fan as well, so it's not going to overheat. There's so many benefits of having an interchangeable lens camera as your first beginner camera than there is with the iPhone. But we have to take a step back and say, obviously, the best camera is going to be the one that you're going to be learning on and just absolutely grinding through. So if you can't afford an FX30, then an iPhone is absolutely going to do you justice. It's absolutely going to do fantastic. It really comes down to progressing into your creative journey. So just getting better each and every single day. And if this is just the tool that's going to get you there, then so be it. If the iPhone's the tool that's going to get you there, so be it as well. So realistically, look, at the end of the day, I personally would be choosing an FX30. If I were to start fresh and were a beginner, FX30 would be the way to go rather than the iPhone. But there is no discrediting the iPhone because the capabilities on that thing is absolutely incredible. But yeah, I hope you got something out of this, and if you did, please give it a thumbs up, and thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Let's get it.